could even walk, he was exposed to a world of violence and sexual depravity.
The father would bring home prostitutes in front of the mother.
And have intercourse with them in front of the children.
My father had Albert by the neck, picked him literally off the floor and was just shaking him like a rag doll.
As a grown man, he desperately wanted women to love him. His desperation became a sickness, and women picked at random became victims of his lust and brutality. Eventually, he confronted the monster within him, known to the world as the Boston Strangler. He confessed to it all.
I did Strangler with my 2 hands.
But was this man really the Strangler, or did he choose infamy over obscurity?
He had an absolute pathological lust for celebrity. He wanted to be famous.
He looked in the mirror every morning and said, "Who can I lie to today?" I mean, that was Henry DeSalvo.
Boston, 1962. On the verge of an encounter with one of the most feared and elusive serial killers in American history, the Boston Strangler.
People said that it was as if Jack the Ripper had come back from the dead to stalk Boston.
Twilight, June 14th, victim number 1. The body of 55-year-old Anna Slessers was found with a sash tied around her neck. The knot so tight that blood was dripping from her ear. Her attacker sexually assaulted her with an unknown object, then left her half naked, sprawled on the kitchen floor. 2 weeks later, victim number 2. 68-year-old Nina Nichols was found dead in her apartment. 2 nylon stockings wound around her neck, blood dripping from both ears. She had been sexually violated with a bottle. The next week, victim number 3 was found in Lynn, just north of Boston. Helen Blake, who was 65, was lying on her bed wearing nothing but a pajama top stained with blood. 2 stockings and a bra were wrapped tightly around her neck, fashioned into a bow. She, too, had been sexually assaulted. Police suspected they had a single culprit on their hands. The similarities seemed to add up to the grisly signature of a deranged killer. Then, like clockwork, victim number 4 was found 3 weeks later back in Boston. This time, the killer posed the naked body of 75-year-old Ida Erga, with her legs spread wide, straddling 2 chairs, exposed to whoever opened the apartment door. Once again, the cause of death was strangulation. The Boston Strangler had now pulled off more than a string of murders. He had paralyzed a city with fear. News reports said a madman was on the loose. Within 24 hours of the last murder, another elderly woman's body was found with her head submerged in a tub of water. Victim number 5. 67-year-old Jane Sullivan had 2 stockings twisted around her neck. Then there was an eerie reprieve. For the next 3 months, there were no more stranglings until December 5th, 1962. Victim number 6. Sophie Clark was found gagged and strangled in her apartment near Boston University. Her roommate discovered the body.
She just didn't move, and I was really panicked and shocked, and I called out her name, and I said, "Oh, God." And I just stood there for about a second. I thought, well, what was I going to tell her mother?
They thought they had a serial killer up until the Sophie Clark murder. At that point, they had to stop and think whether it could be the same individual, because certain things were different.
All of the other victims were older and white. Sophie was young, and she was black. At this point, sheer panic enveloped Boston. No woman was safe. Old, young, black, white, anyone could be a target. Boston's Phantom Strangler was grabbing headlines fast. Newspapers churned out fear with each edition, and people looked for any way to protect themselves.
Every morning, the pound would be empty because the dogs would have been seized by citizens.
There has been a tremendous demand for animals of all sizes, both large and small, since the strangulations began.
There was a run on locks.
After each one of these stranglings,
we get quite a spurt for all types of locks, mainly these chain locks.
Avon salesmen and Fuller brushmen were brusquely driven away. The whole town was locked up.
But all the security precautions failed to prevent another murder. By the end of 1962, the Strangler claimed his 7th victim. Patricia Bissett, just 23 years old, was found strangled on New Year's Eve. At this point, police were baffled. At each crime scene, there was no sign of forced entry, no robbery, no apparent motive.
We don't feel that the person or persons responsible for one or more of these crimes is necessarily 100% psychotic. We feel that the person may be normal in many ways. We feel that they will tell someone about it. We would like to hear from that person or persons before harm comes to someone else.
But harm did come. During the next year, 3 more women died at the hands of the Strangler, including 23-year-old Joanne Graff, raped, then strangled. The same day, America mourned the death of President Kennedy. But the most vicious crime of all was yet to come. Victim number 11, Mary Sullivan, just shy of her 20th birthday, was found in her Boston apartment on January 4th, 1964. The killer had strangled her and shoved a broom handle inside her. Propped against her foot was a greeting card proclaiming Happy New Year. Then, just as mysteriously as they started, the murders stopped. The police had exhausted every lead, but had no concrete evidence. So, the state of Massachusetts created the Strangler Bureau, a multi-agency task force with one goal in mind: find the Strangler.
This office is concerned.
The Attorney General, Edward Brooke, was under a lot of pressure to step in and correlate the various investigations in Greater Boston.
As far as I'm concerned, it was one of the most extensive searches and investigations that we ever had.
Since June 1962, we've interrogated or interviewed over 5,000 people. We've screened over 2,500 sex offenders who have been released from mental hospitals and jails and institutions.
But the cops had little to go on.
We had well over 1,000 leads in our files, but no one suspect would apply to all of the stranglers we were looking at.
The police never did find the Boston Strangler. Instead, the Strangler found the police. Almost a year after the last killing, a man stepped forward and claimed that he was the one. He was the Boston Strangler. His name? Albert Henry DeSalvo. It was March 1965 when America could finally put a face to the monster known as the Boston Strangler. A 33-year-old construction worker named Albert DeSalvo had confessed to the 18-month killing spree. At the time, he was awaiting trial for a series of rapes. Boston police believed Albert was their man. His confessions included remarkably accurate details, especially when it came to the last victim, Mary Sullivan.
I left her on the side of the bed with her head hanging down, her bust was exposed, and was she lying flat on her back, or was she? No, she was sitting up.
I spent time in all the Boston cases and most of the outside cases, and his description is better than what I could give at that time.
Police and reporters began unraveling the troubled life of Albert DeSalvo. It had begun during the Great Depression in Chelsea, the poorest town in all of Massachusetts.
Albert DeSalvo was born in Chelsea in September of 1931. He was the third of 6 children of Charlotte and Frank DeSalvo. His childhood was miserable. Frank was a monster of abuse to his wife and to his children. He once broke Charlotte's fingers by serially snapping them as if they were dry twigs. Frank DeSalvo would bring home prostitutes and have intercourse with them in front of the children.
One of the things that stands up would be probably when I was 4 or 5 years old, is my mother and my father having a fight. And at some point, my mother got knocked down, and my